Sinners has been a wildly praised Ryan Coogler movie starring Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld. I thought it was pretty middling, almost more of a historical drama than a horror movie. I thought the things that it mostly did well, but a lot of the story seems to serve no real purpose. There's some pretty clever horror stuff and then some really dumb stuff mixed in. I think it's pretty obvious that Ryan Coogler is very competent as a director when he's not being shackled by Marvel or Disney. Michael B. Jordan is one of the strangest actors to me because I think he's a really good actor, and yet I have a hard time finding a movie that I actually like that he's starring in. I don't mind a slow burn as long as the things that you set up actually have payoffs. And this movie really doesn't fulfill that requirement for me. When you had the entire movie in context, it just kind of feels self-indulgent and like it easily could have been 45 minutes shorter and accomplished the same shit, whether that 45 minutes is to get rid of the horror elements or the drama elements at the beginning. I'm going to leave my meta thoughts about this till the end because that's always my least favorite shit to discuss. But I definitely have thoughts on the meta aspect of this movie and why it's being so highly praised. But I do want to just talk about it as a movie first. So let's get into it. So we're in the 1930s in the South. The movie starts with a flash forward that doesn't really do much for me beyond kind of serving as a spoiler for how the movie's going to turn out. The sort of standard way you would do one of these flash forwards is either one, your flash forward doesn't take you all the way to the present, or that there's not enough context for you to really understand what the flash forward means. Breaking Bad is obviously one of the best examples of this, where you see these flash forwards to the end of the season, and they're pretty good at being misleading, but interesting still. Mission Impossible 3 also uses this pretty effectively. Whether or not the story makes sense is a different issue. Reservoir Dogs does a great job of this. You can definitely do it in a way that I think is useful to the film. It doesn't really seem to serve much of a purpose here to me beyond wanting to be kind of an initial hook to let you know it will be a horror movie eventually. And it just feels like kind of an insecure decision more than anything, that the audience wouldn't maintain interest long enough if it just started off linearly. And frankly, given the pacing of this movie, I think that insecurity is warranted. Now, that said, I actually do like a lot of the character work that's set up in this first 45 minutes to an hour. My issue is more that the latter half of the movie doesn't satisfy any of that buildup. I think you get some really good backstories. They're pretty cool characters. You had the Smokestack twins who are World War I veterans, robbing gangsters in Chicago. Stack had a white girlfriend. Well, I guess she's a quarter black, but she looks white. Smoke had a wife and they lost a child together. Their cousin Sammy likes to play the blues, even though his dad's a pastor and he's really against it. The Smokestack twins buy a sawmill to turn into a juke place, knowing they're buying it from a racist white guy. They bring in their friend Delta Slim to play, who's an alcoholic because he saw his friend unjustifiably get lynched. We see that Mary is still upset about being dumped by Stack, even though he says that he did it to protect her because there'd be consequences possibly for both of them if they try to be an interracial couple in this era. So there's a lot of really pretty complex and interesting characters and relationships and dynamics going on. Unfortunately, they don't really go beyond that because the movie in the latter half kind of just turns into a generic vampire movie. So about 45 minutes in is when we meet Remmeck, who's like the head vampire, and he's being chased by a bunch of Native Americans, but he asks this couple to hide in their house and they're part of the clan. So they refuse the Indians because they're racist. And the Indians, knowing what Remmeck is, as nightfall is approaching, are just like, all right, see you then. Which is a shame because they actually seem like a pretty cool part of the story, but they're just gone now. So at this point, we're a full hour into the movie. Sammy plays at the Smokestack twins juke. It's their opening night. They're all having a good time. And his guitar, I guess, either summons spirits or has some kind of connection throughout time to where you get the whole history of black music prior to this era and leading all the way up into our current day. So the story is kind of forcing you to tie together the messages in the movie with current day by making a choice like this, I think. There's a little bit more drama in the club, but nothing that's not kind of rehashing what we've already seen. We do get to see Sammy's enamored with a married woman. Mary is unhappy in her marriage and pursuing Stack, but nothing really added that we didn't already have the first 45 minutes. So at this point, we're over an hour in, and now the vampires show up to try to get into the juke. But this movie goes with pretty standard vampire rules, so they can't come in unless they're invited. And they get turned away because the Smokestack brothers are suspicious that it could draw undue attention if they have white people in this bar, or if there was any kind of conflict, they would get blamed. Mary tries to go talk to Remmeck and his group and see if they can be brought in or not. She realizes that they're weird and then tries to get back to the bar. Pretty obviously, she gets turned off screen because she can't come back into the juke until Cornbread invites her in. Mary comes in, is aggressive with Stack, and then bites him as soon as they get into private. Smoke shoots her, and she just gets up and runs away. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, is they kind of built up like drama with their story or some kind of maybe interesting payoff to the relationship, and instead she just bites him. Like if their relationship had had zero background and we didn't see her until they show up at the juke, not much would really be lost story-wise. We also see Cornbread get turned off screen when he's out there peeing. So after this weirdness with Mary and what they've seen, Annie, Smoke's partner, is super into hoodoo and very suspicious about what's going on. And she keeps saying there's a haint, which I'd never heard before, but is apparently some kind of spirit. And these are the parts of the movie that I think are actually pretty well done. It's pretty obvious that Mary got turned off screen because you see Remmeck jump at her. It's obvious that we see Cornbread get turned, but you can see that he won't come inside, and the characters are suspicious because they're like, why do you need to be invited to come inside? So even when he goes to hand him the pay, he has his gun out, and as soon as Cornbread lunges at him, he shoots him. So I like that when your characters aren't just complete imbeciles. Stack wakes up and is suddenly fine. Obviously, they're all very suspicious now. He breaks the door down and just runs out. I don't know what the exact rules are. If he started in this place, could he not just walk in whenever? But either way, he just runs away. These vampires don't have super speed or strength, seemingly. So maybe they're vulnerable if there's only one of them. And there's some pretty neat little moments in here where Remmeck is leading a big song of the whole group, and you can see all the people in town that he's turned and kind of how quickly they're spreading. We see Bo come back and try to lure his wife out. They try to emotionally manipulate her by saying that they'll go get the daughter if she doesn't come outside. Decent stuff, kind of short-lived. And this eventually breaks Grace, who can't wait for sunrise, and she screams, "Come in, you bunch of motherfuckers," giving all the vampires permission to come in at the same time. I don't know really how I feel about this specific decision. I get what they were going for, that she felt like they had to protect the town and her daughter specifically, so you can kind of forgive the emotional lapse in judgment. The way the movie is framed, at least based on this action scene and kind of how it ends, is sunrise is very close, so I don't know. It's one of those things where you can justify it by saying she was emotional, but I think it also doesn't help that it seems like in about half an hour here, the sun rises, because people around her are saying, hey, the sun will be up soon. But for me, this is also where it kind of just turns into sort of generic horror schlock. I mean, they just make a point to show that there's like 50 of these fucking vampires, and they show us all the people left in the juke, and it's either 8 or 9. So I just don't believe for a second that any of them would be alive after like 30 seconds. They're using makeshift stakes and just guns that don't do anything. And we get a fight between Smoke and Stack, where Smoke lets Stack get away, we find out in the credits scene, which this is after he watched him turn his woman. Make of that what you will. But they all fight, and eventually Sammy gets out, and Remmeck just does like James Bond levels of monologuing here before he turns him over and over and over so he doesn't get turned, which we already know he doesn't thanks to that flash forward. Sammy hits him in the head with a guitar. It fucks him up just long enough for the sun to come out, so they all burn. And somewhere, Stack and Mary ran off and hid from the sunlight because we see that they're still alive in the 90s. Smoke stays behind. He knows that the clan is coming for him, which super subtle. They waited literally one day to come for him. But whatever. He knows they're coming, and he preps with his guns. So it's a decent action scene. He uses his rifle, takes a bunch out. He had a Tommy gun buried. He breaks out and fucks him up, and some grenades. He does take a shot to the side, though, as he's bleeding out with the Grand Dragon, Wizard, whatever the fuck they're called in the KKK, bleeding out in front of him. He starts seeing his wife and their kid, and he's going to join them soon, and until the KKK guy interrupts, and then he unloads like 100 bullets into him and then dies. We see old Sammy 60 years later. Stack and Mary show up, have a conversation with him, ask him if he wants to turn. He declines. We get a nice little 90s Africana style reference here from Stack. Him and Mary are on their way. Remmeck had made this offer of turning people to everyone, saying it would bring them all together. Obviously, no one wanted that until after they returned. And there you have it. That's Sinners. Like I said, I thought the movie was almost like 2/3 of a drama and 1/3 kind of a shitty horror movie. There were definitely elements that I liked throughout, but once you have the whole movie in hindsight, it just sort of seems like the first hour was to show what life was like 100 years ago and didn't really feel necessary for the last 45 minutes. I've seen some people debate about if what Remmeck was offering was truly better, and he had a point because he's talking about how the KKK guy was going to kill Smoke and Stack, and that humans aren't accepting, and that if they become vampires, they'll essentially transcend racism. Maybe in a really different context, and if the movie had focused a lot more on that component, your story could work. If you want to make it some kind of moral dilemma about which side is actually right, I don't think this movie ever even broaches the subject of the vampires possibly being right. I think what you would have had to do, instead of just showing the vampires being like, oh, we're at peace now, is probably more along the lines of some of the people in the juke willingly leave to go become vampires. And then you can have kind of the debate about which life path was better or whatever. But when they're just monsters biting people and forcing them to become part of their hive mind, or whatever you want to call it, where they're all tied to Remmeck, there's never the element of choice. There's essentially no movie I can think of where you're going to see a genetic supremacist or a eugenicist be in the morally correct side of the movie. So for me, giving the movie that much credit is really doing a lot of the legwork for it, and I don't think it's earned. And that aspect actually kind of leads me into the meta part of this video. Thematically, I think this movie wants to have its cake and eat it too, where it wants you to tie all the past and present together through Sammy's music, but then also be in a setting that allows for him to make every single white person bad. And again, this to me just seems like he's more competent at blending his stories in with his beliefs than a lot of the writers that we see right now. And for me, I think this movie is getting way more credit than it really deserves because it's by a black guy and it's a predominantly black cast and promotes the politics that the Hollywood and critical crowd agree with. And I mentioned this earlier that the first part of the movie really just seems to be to bitch about how shitty America used to be and how racist it was, because it introduces these complex characters and you get no payoffs for it. And I think any other movie would not be getting the benefit of the doubt for great storytelling if it was written like this one is. It would be called boring. And to elaborate on that a little bit, a lot of times what you'll see in horror movies, particularly good ones, is if someone has a kind of flaw, that's what gets them killed. Or if they made a fuck up in the past, they redeem themselves by sacrificing their life at some point in a fitting manner. A very obvious example of this, and this will be a spoiler of Train to Busan, will be the father in Train to Busan. We see at the beginning of the movie that he's been a kind of a neglectful and generally bad father. As the movie goes on, he ends up taking care of a pregnant woman because one of the other characters died. He takes care of his own daughter, and at the end of the movie, he sacrifices his life for both of them. A very fitting death, really good character arc, and it leads to a really emotional moment once you've seen the character redeem himself over the course of the movie. Something similar in the other direction would be the guy who abandons the kids in Jurassic Park, tries to hide in the toilet, and gets eaten by the T-Rex. His flaw of being a coward and trying to just save himself is what makes you be like, yeah, fuck him when he gets eaten. And it's a satisfying death for the audience. This movie takes the time to build up the relationship between Stack and Mary, but it's completely unnecessary for them both to turn into vampires. She could have literally just been some whore in the bar. It takes the time to build up Delta Slim's background, where his friend got lynched. And I guess you could say he stays behind and dies and sacrifices himself. It's not very satisfying. There's not much to it, partially because the execution of that scene in general, I think. Mary herself getting turned just kind of happens. Same for Cornbread, who wasn't too much of a character anyway. Smoke lets his brother go after he watched him turn his wife, who he then had to kill himself. The Klan guys literally sell him the place and then just show up at the end to get mowed down. There's literally nothing to their characters or those deaths other than to allow Smoke to get killed and be in the afterlife with his wife and child. Sammy pursues this married woman who just gets eaten, and then he names his band after her. I think Ryan Coogler is a very competent filmmaker and competent enough to be racist and have defenses already built into his stories. I've only seen both Black Panther movies and this one. Watched one of the Creed movies, don't remember much about it, but they all kind of have the same vibe to me of where he does a good enough job of placing his settings that he can make all of the characters black and the white people bad. Like, obviously, no one's going to complain about Klan members getting killed. No one's going to complain about a fictional African country being all black. And this goes both ways. It's not just anti-white. We see in this movie where the one who fucks it up for him is the Asian lady. You see something like in this movie where a movie that is seemingly promoting black culture and black history, both of your protagonists sleep with married women. Another thing that I thought was strange was when it's showing all the different black music throughout history, past and future, i.e. our time. He included a girl twerking her ass. Again, it's this type of shit that I'm not sure if it's pandering or if this is what he thinks black people are. I would assume you'd want to show the positive side of black culture. The whole movie is really focused around blues. Why not have a more jazz-like type person there, or even just a classier looking rapper, male or female? Maybe black people are proud of twerking their asses, but I can't imagine that's what you want your culture to be known for. Of course, this is the same guy that in Black Panther, where they had insanely high tech, had them open their sci-fi doors with drums, and when they could have any kind of advanced weaponry you'd like, he gave them spears. The way they decide on who their leader is through a one-on-one contest of strength. This is all the type of shit that if done by a white person, people would be like, what the hell is wrong with you? And he just gets praised for it. And like I said, by putting it in the 1930s, it allows him to make every single white person bad. So the end of the movie, to me, didn't really feel like it added much other than being anti-white porn. In the same way that every white person in Black Panther is bad or a fucking idiot. They refer to white people as colonizers, while unironically having Black Panther say I can't be responsible for what my ancestors did. And the main villain is Black Hitler, who's portrayed as some kind of nuanced villain. In Black Panther 2, one of the biggest problems that the black people have is they can't swim. And to reiterate, people said that this vampire was nuanced. In no fucking world would any other writer get credit for that. I wouldn't say this movie is as disjointed as something like 28 Years Later, which felt like 3 completely separate movies. But this movie feels very much like half a historical drama, partially a shitty horror movie, and I guess weirdly kind of a musical mixed in. So for me, this movie just doesn't work. Probably never watch it again. I think it's being way overrated. It's unfortunate because I thought the character setups were all really good, and then they just kind of go away so it can turn into a generic horror movie. And if this movie had a more white cast, it would be shit all over. So overall, just thought it was a really average movie. I think the hype for it is way fucking overblown. I thought it was mainly boring more than anything. The horror was kind of a mixed bag of pretty interesting and really dumb. The characters lead to nothing. And at the end of the day, I think he did enough to where the more artsy crowd will try to say that it's not anti-white because of Remmeck being Irish and talking about their oppression and his platitudes about transcending racism. But none of that stuff works for me, and it seems pretty transparent that they were doing just the bare minimum to be able to have something to hide behind from accusations of racism. And I think as much as this movie did well in the box office and got very good critical acclaim, I'm very skeptical that anyone will be talking about this movie in like 6 months. It just seems to me like we're in an era of the soft bigotry of low expectations where any black movie is going to get way more praise than it should, and that kind of is what it is. And it's a shame because there's plenty of great predominantly black movies. I recently watched American Fiction and talked about it. If you want to go a little bit more old school, movies like Menace to Society are fucking great, and instead we'll all just pretend like this is some kind of fucking masterpiece. I'm gonna leave it there for this one. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think. Try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.